Can you folks all hear me without the mic? Everyone in the back? Yeah, great. I'll probably try without the mic. I think that'll be a little easier for me than having to navigate holding a thing. I'm not a professional singer or performer like the folks who were on before. So my name's Nigel Jenkins. For those of you I haven't had a chance to meet yet, I'm an artist manager based in Canada. Started my company, Laughing Heart Music, back in 2015. Prior to that, I was a practicing lawyer. I like to say I took my retirement from law early, toasted actually to my own early retirement at Christmas, December 2014, much to my parents' dismay, after having supported me through 3 years of law school and the year of articling. But anyway, I found my way, had lots of friends who worked in the music business growing up, and I got to go on tour with a good buddy of mine, Ben Kaplan, in January of 2015, from New York City right down to Austin, Texas for South by Southwest that year, and that's what started my journey in the music business. I went to the East Coast Music Awards in St. John's, Newfoundland later that year, volunteering in the export buyer's room, and I took every business card I could find in that room. I went back, followed up with everybody, pretending I had met all of them, not actually having necessarily met many of them, but that turned into a couple of paid internships, which rolled into me later that year starting my own company, Laughing Heart Music. And what began as a small artist management company with just 2 artist management clients turned into a record label and a music publisher. In 2018, I moved home to Newfoundland and Labrador from Halifax, Nova Scotia. After falling in love, my wife has a real job. She's an optometrist. And so it was a lot easier for me to take my laptop home to Newfoundland than it would have been for her to bring a whole optometry practice to Nova Scotia where I was living. We got married, we had a baby. In 2022, I bought a building and I put a little tweet out. I think it was still Twitter at the time. Does anyone know when it turned from Twitter to X? It's not super important. Anyway, I put a tweet out, or a post on X saying, was it 23? Okay, so it was still Twitter, still tweet. And I said on Twitter that I just bought this building, I want to turn it into an arts hub for the community. And the provincial government caught wind of that, and they loved the idea so much that they gave me $1.5 million to make that vision come true. So folks are pretty well aware, I think, of all of the grant funding that we have access to in Canada, and that's a big part of what's empowered my company and allowed me to build over all these years. And so now I've got a team, full-time team of 5. We represent about a dozen artists across management, label, and music publishing activities. We've got a studio in our building. We share the space with a bookshop and a food cooperative. It's a very cool thing. And so a lot of my work sits at the intersection of artist development, of touring, of international market building, of funding, of course, and trying to help artists build careers that are not only ambitious, but also sustainable. And that word sustainable is what I want to talk about here this afternoon. Because when we talk a lot about international cultural mobility or international touring, the conversation often starts and ends with, visas. So visas, work permits, border rules, tax compliance, customs, carnets. Anyone here ever had to put a carnet together? Yeah, Danielle, I know you have. A carnet? Can I call on you, Danielle? I'd like this to be like active participation. Do you mind?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So the way that I understand a carnet is having to do with merchandise.
Yep.
And cross-border bringing of that merchandise for sale as an artist, like Canada to the U.S., for example, where you actually have to work with, I think there's only 2 companies that you can actually file a carnet with, and it's basically like border and taxation control of the goods. So it's like a short-term import-export license, essentially, and it costs, I think, like $2,500
Yeah.
US dollars. So it's like you pay this money just for the right to sell your CDs and whatnot.
Yeah.
And it's not worth doing it. It's so like the average folk artist, you're gonna put your CDs in an extra suitcase, and honestly, the people at the border don't want to know. They don't want to deal with.
They don't want to do the paperwork
either. So, like, I always advise people, have a box of CDs that's like a visible box.
Yeah.
Sorry, I probably shouldn't.
No, this is great. I invited you, please.
Say that those are your like demo CDs, your promotional CDs that you're your play and have a suitcase full of the rest of your CDs. Because I mean, honestly, if you start to say, "Oh, I have about like 200 CDs," they're gonna roll their eyes and be like, "Frig, why did you say this?" Like, very serious. That's been like every border interaction I've heard from the artists I work with. So like a carnet is basically a short-term import-export license, and I don't know why I have this one Quebecois artist that is so by the book.
Wants to do them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Friggin' rule followers.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, that's what a carnet is.
Which border are you talking about? The American border?
The Canadian-American border. Yeah.
Another.
That's border.
And that's why you're getting asked at all of these border controls. If you have pointed out we're traveling for business, they're asking, are you bringing any merchandise today?
Yeah.
And then you say no.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you both. So what I want to zoom out on and talk about today is a bit of a broader question. So what actually allows artists to move meaningfully across borders, and what keeps that from happening? Because in my experience, it's not the inability to cross a border that results in international touring failing or not succeeding. More often it's because there's no viable systems on the other side to support the artists. That's me. I already told you about myself. Fun story about this new headshot I took. I felt like I kind of looked like a lawyer again in it. So April Fool's is the thing here too, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, great. You're foolish here too, wonderful. So on April Fool's, I posted this picture and I said, I'm so happy to announce after 10 years of retirement from the legal practice, I'm starting Nigel Jenkins Law Firm, Inc., and we're going to focus exclusively on class action lawsuits for bald people who have been targeted by Turkish hair transplant ads on Instagram. And lots of people had a good laugh at that. The day before I flew over here, I got a call from my local newspaper. They said, "Hey, we heard you're opening a new law firm. Could we talk to you about the story?" And I had to explain to them like what April Fool's was. They didn't get the joke. They read the first line and then they reached out for an interview. And anyway, clearly it wasn't that good a joke because I had to explain it. So this is the core idea I want to talk about. We often treat mobility as an immigration problem, but artists don't build international careers through access alone, just by crossing borders. They build them through systems that make movement economically, relationally, meaning relationships, and professionally viable. So movement is not the same as mobility. An artist can showcase once in a country and still have no pathway to return, route there, earn, or grow in that market. And that's movement. It's not meaningful mobility as I'm trying to define it here with this presentation. So what we usually mean by mobility. Can everybody read this okay? Because I'm kind of going to gloss the slides, and I have my own notes. So you can read the slides. I'll read from my notes. So these are the issues that we often talk about when we're referring to mobility, and they all matter, and they're real, and they're frustrating. But if we only talk about these kinds of barriers, we're treating mobility as a paperwork problem primarily. And it's not primarily a paperwork problem. That's just often the most visible symptom of what I think is a much broader structural issue. So this is the main reframe I want to try and provide today, is that mobility is a systems problem, not just an immigration problem. And once you start looking at it that way, we're not just asking what rules are in place or what forms need to be completed. We're asking more important questions like, what kind of an ecosystem is an artist trying to move through? How connected are the markets they're trying to enter? How expensive is it to do that, very importantly? How likely can one opportunity create more opportunities that compound over time for the artist in that market? And then how much friction is built into the process, and who's being asked to carry or absorb that friction? Because usually it's the artist, and in most cases the artist is the least resourced person or group in the equation in terms of who can actually take on that friction, which in a lot of cases, I mean cost and expense. So why this matters now. Artists are being told to export, scale, and compete globally, often inside of systems that are structurally inefficient and financially unforgiving. The problem is that many artists are asked to pursue international growth inside of systems that are becoming increasingly difficult to navigate. Travel's more expensive, accommodations are more expensive, Your profit margins are thinner than they've ever been. Audiences are fragmented or frankly just choosing to stay home in a lot of cases. And a lot of artists end up carrying way too much unpaid labor to begin with, even before they've stepped foot onto a plane or into the tour bus. If you had to check bags with all of your unpaid labor in it, you wouldn't be able to afford to get on the plane. So when we talk about international mobility, what I want to be frank about is the reality that for most artists, it's becoming an increasingly challenging position. And I just want to note, this is the one place where my beautiful color coordination on my slide failed because I couldn't get rid of that orange. And that's a bit frustrating to me as a guy who has a family history of OCD. I do have a good dad joke about oranges, though, if y'all would entertain me, humor me. What is orange and sounds like a parrot? Anybody? A carrot. Thank you. One more. Thank you for coming. That's the end of my presentation. One more, okay, because the KFC got brought up.
Okay.
Why are KFCs so spooky? Because they're full of poultrygeists. I find myself funny, and I claim my right to dad jokes. I have a 5-year-old at home. It's my God-given right. So the false assumption we make is that if we make visas easier, international touring is going to work, and this is not necessarily the case. Even when entry is possible, touring can still fail because of low fees, poor routing, a lack of local partners, weak audience fit, or unsustainable logistics. This is something I didn't do very well as an early artist manager, booking agent. I would send artists on the road with gigantic stretches of drives in between shows. And as far as the sustainability of touring goes, I find that's one of the hardest pieces on the artist. And it's maybe not so much the case here, but back home in Canada, once you get to Toronto, it's, what is it, Danielle, 12 hours to Thunder Bay if you want to play Thunder Bay. And then from Thunder Bay to Winnipeg is another 14 hours. And we would route these gigantic cross-Canadian tours where, artists would have to spend full days, 2 full days, 3 full days driving just to get where they're going, and that's not sustainable. So the real question is not, can an artist get into the country? It's, can they justify being there in a way that compounds over time? Because if each trip is effectively a reset in the market, if you're starting at zero again each time you go back, it's a sign of weak infrastructure. And so what we should want is for artists to move through systems where one opportunity is creating conditions for the next and the next and the next, and that's how things start to become sustainable. So I want to move into some of the barriers now, and the first is geography. So by show of hands, how many folks here are from what you would describe as like a small or a rural center? Yeah, and how many are from a bigger city? Okay, great. So it's a bit of a mix. I'm from a town of 400 in Steadybrook, Newfoundland and Labrador, where I live and grew up. They tried to make me mayor in the fall, but I refused because we've got real water issues, and I didn't want to get tied up into that. That could have become a full-time job for me. So geography. Distance is not neutral is my main point here. It changes the economics of mobility, it changes the logistics of mobility, and it changes the amount of risk that's attached to every booking decision. The further you've got to go, the more risk you take on. And it changes how much infrastructure an artist needs around them for a trip to make sense. And so if you're based in a major urban center, like some of you folks here are in the room, you may have denser touring infrastructure around you, and your path into international markets is going to be very different than for folks who are coming from more rural places. So I'll use myself as an example again. I live on an island in the North Atlantic on the east coast of Canada. For my artists who also live in Newfoundland and Labrador to get anywhere, it's a ferry or a flight. We've got really one city that you can play meaningfully in Newfoundland and Labrador, and it's on the furthest east coast of the island in our capital city of St. John's. There are some acts, like Rum Ragged, who I manage, because they play traditional Newfoundland music. There's 30 cities, towns, local service districts, villages that they can perform in, but for anyone playing in a broader sort of folk or popular music genre, it can be very difficult to tour meaningfully, even across your own province. And so you've got to get out of the province. And I would imagine for some of you folks that are in rural areas, you've got to get into the big city to get into another country. It's different for everybody. So the next barrier is the economics of touring. And we've got a bad habit of celebrating activity that is economically unfeasible as an industry. We praise artists for breaking into new markets when what they're really doing is just spending money internationally. And that doesn't mean that early stage international development has to be immediately profitable. Of course it won't be, but there needs to be a viable path to profitability and to sustainability for it to make sense. So one of the biggest determinants of mobility is whether a region behaves like a circuit or just a collection of isolated opportunities. A circuit means that opportunities connect, but when markets are fragmented, artists often get stuck in one-off opportunity land. Again, this is a mistake I made a lot early on in my career. So I started my company in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and I can remember one year we got an offer for Canadian Music Week for one of my management clients, which is in Toronto. And rather than routing over to Toronto for Canadian Music Week, we did a straight shot 20-hour drive from Halifax to land to play the showcase, and did a 20-hour drive back, which is not the sort of thing that you can do repeatedly long term and have a healthy career and a healthy body, mind, spirit. Fourth barrier is relationship infrastructure. So artists don't move through systems alone, they move through their relationships, people who are willing to take risks, to open doors, and who you build trust with. Cultural translation is another important barrier. So not every artist should be pushed into every international market. They also need to be able to translate into that market. And by translation, I don't just mean in terms of language, I mean in terms of musical or cultural understanding. I forget who it was yesterday that was speaking about, not understanding the lyrics that were being sung, but feeling it in their heart. Yeah, like that sort of translation. I work with an act, as I mentioned, Rum Ragged from Newfoundland and Labrador. Those guys play traditional Newfoundland music, which is very Irish and Celtic influenced. And so early on, one of our theories or hypotheses was that, this will do great in Ireland. We should try and get over to Ireland with these guys. But as it turns out, there's a lot of great Celtic music in Ireland already, and they didn't need us. So there wasn't a great fit for them. Where we have found a fit for Rum Ragged has been in other parts and pockets of the world where there are expat Newfoundlanders, folks from the Irish diaspora who love what they're doing and who gravitate towards it because of the connection to that Celtic tradition and Celtic music that they can't find in their current home market. Capacity, this is a big one. Artists are often expected to do export work without having the export infrastructure built around them. Do they have a team, systems, budget, strategy, time, follow-up capacity? And if mobility isn't working for an act, it's not always that the artist isn't ready, it's that they may not have the support structure necessary around them yet to meaningfully engage in that kind of work. And this is my last barrier we'll talk about, policy mismatch. So a lot of support structures are built around moments and events, but artists build careers through repeat appearances and through systems. One of the big questions I think it's important for funders and for sector organizations to ask is, are we funding what looks like mobility, or are we funding what actually creates it? So if we want better outcomes, we need to ask better questions. Instead of how do we help artists travel, I think what we should be asking is how do we help artists return, route, and become more viable into the markets that we're helping get them into. And this is where the conversation can become more useful and where we can start to talk about real solutions. And here's what I think makes mobility actually work. So I think it depends on circuits, relationships, repeat presence, and then I smushed economic viability and strategic fit together because this is a PowerPoint template and I didn't know how to make a fifth row there for myself. But I want to talk through each of these quickly now. So mobility works best in circuits and not in one-offs. This is maybe the single most practical shift for artists and the folks who support them, because one isolated opportunity often is not enough to justify the cost of entry. But if an opportunity connects to more shows, to meetings, to a nearby festival, to return invitations or new industry relationships, that's when things start to look different. And so I think one of the more useful habits we can build is to stop evaluating international opportunities in isolation. So rather than asking, is this a good opportunity in and of itself, asking instead, what does this connect to? So another mistake of mine, just to air out all of the bad things I've done over the course of my career, we took an artist to the Great Escape in Brighton in the UK. This was in 2018, so pretty early on in my career and pretty early on in the artist. Neither of us was prepared, and we spent 10 grand going to this conference where she ended up playing for one person in the basement of the Queen's Hotel as part of her official showcase, and then went home. And now that one person ended up being a US booking agent who booked a bunch of gigs subsequently. So one person in the room can make a difference, but in that moment, of course, it was very disheartening for all of us. And that's the sort of thing that can happen when you go into a new environment unplanned, unprepared, too early on, and without the intention of connecting opportunities in the way I'm suggesting. So relationships, one of the least discussed but most important parts of international development. Relationships reduce friction in all aspects of the industry. They make things easier to initiate. They come preloaded with trust. They make routing easier because you're working with partners who know the markets. They make things easier to follow through on, which is why relationship building is not some soft thing around the edges of international work. I think it is at the core of international work. And I think that's especially true for those of us who are in smaller and more relationship-driven music ecosystems. Your network is everything. And not just who you know, but who trusts you, who will vouch for you as well. So repeat presence. International careers are rarely built on first entry. They're built on repeat entry. I think those of us who are helping artists build internationally, for artists who have been able to successfully build international careers, you know this intuitively. It's not just you show up and suddenly you have a market. And the problem is a lot of export strategy fails because it's too scattered. Artists are trying to be too many places too quickly. Jakob, I think you were talking about this yesterday. You wanted to be in China, you wanted to be in Australia, you wanted to be everywhere.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Who doesn't?
Which is an awesome ambition, but it can be tough to execute on, right? You can't actually go into all of those markets at the one time. You'd have to have some pretty serious bankroll if you were going to try it. And then another important point is that familiarity with new audiences takes time to develop. So when we're going into new markets with artists that I represent, we're usually trying to follow up within the first 6 months, and then at least once per year, every year after that, in order to establish the market.
For how long?
For how long? Indefinitely, ideally. If they're going to have a lifelong career, I think the markets that we're building, we want to show up there annually every year for as long as they're active. Now, that'll change in terms of being on cycle or off cycle with new albums. And of course, artists need to take breaks sometimes too. But we're trying to go annually into all the markets that we're touring in. But I'm also working with a lot of emerging and mid-level artists, so I can imagine a scenario with bigger acts where that might spread even further. Maybe it becomes every 2 years, every 3 years at some point for certain acts. So for economic viability and strategic fit, I'm not saying that every international move needs to make money immediately. That wouldn't be realistic, but you do need to have a plausible path towards viability, and you do need to be prepared to make that early stage investment in developing a new market. So if we want better cultural mobility, we need to design for continuity and not just access. Continuity is created through systems that make it easier for artists to return, reconnect, route, build, and compound in these markets. And here are some things that I think would make for a better model for artist mobility. The first thing I think would make a real difference is stronger regional touring corridors, and particularly for smaller, decentralized, or geographically dispersed markets. If smaller markets want to become more viable for artists, they often need to function more collaboratively. So again, back in my home province, we've built out a database at nlvenues.com where we've connected all of the presenting venues in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. It's a searchable database. You can get all of the information for each of the venues in terms of their stage plots, their technical specifications, their financial arrangements, the kind of staffing they have in-house, what kind of marketing support they provide. And we're in the process of building out a back-end portal for this database so that we can actually connect on a communication front all of these venues so that they can engage in block booking and have shared calendars that empower that, so that we can increase the amount of in-province touring activity that's happening, both for artists who are from Newfoundland and Labrador and for those who would like to tour to us, because we miss a lot of great shows. Most artists touring in Canada will stop, Montreal. Maybe they go to Halifax. Very rarely do they come as far east as us, and I want to change that. Another thing I'd argue for is treating showcases more intentionally as infrastructure and not just as events or as exposure moments, because what a conference like this can do is not just put artists in front of people, it can help to align ecosystems by creating routes, introductions, context, coordination, and that all-important word, follow-up. Have I drilled that hard enough yet, the follow-up piece? Yes? No? Okay, because that is absolutely the most important part of attending an event like this for any artists in the room. It's not the conversations you have here. These are the spark that start to build relationships. It's the follow-up that produces it. If we want better international outcomes, we need to fund repeatability more intentionally. A lot of progress, as I said, happens on the second, the third, the fourth trip, because that's when relationships deepen, when confidence increases, when trust increases, when local understanding improves, and when artists start to become known in a market. So for the support organizations and funders, if there are any of them in the room, I think we need to ask ourselves, how do we help artists not only arrive, but then return under better conditions? Yes, Danielle?
I think that that's a super important point, especially from the presenter side.
Yep.
I'm mainly a booking agent, but I also produce a festival, and any new artists that I bring into the festival each year,
Yep.
I unofficially tell them, because our fees stink, they're booking fees, as a new artist to this region, to this festival, I will program you 2 years in a row, because I think that's
Right.
really important for growth in the market.
Yep.
And I think maybe that's my perspective as a booking agent that makes me have made that change to the festival. But if you're in that position in whatever you're doing, that actually can go really far to help an artist develop that market.
Another great thing I know, or I've experienced festivals doing, is if they're bringing one of our acts in for a first time, they'll actually connect me directly with other festivals that are a couple hours away and make introductions and even propose to that festival on our behalf that they include us. The festivals that share artists and share their booking process, oh my God, it makes such a difference, especially the further away from home you're going. I think another big opportunity is simply to help artists build better mobility capacity, which can include things like export planning, market prioritization, routing logic, pitch clarity, follow-up systems, live offer development, none of which are glamorous things, but these are essential parts of having a show and having an offering that is actually ready to export. And last but not least, I think we need to think more in ecosystems and less in isolated wins. Because one of the traps of the music industry is that we often celebrate the exceptional case, the one artist who breaks through, the outlier, that artist or a group that makes it look like they've done something that's replicable. And while these stories can be inspiring, I think there's also a risk that they distort our perception of what a healthy ecosystem looks like, because it's not A healthy ecosystem is not one where a few artists somehow manage to brute force their way into international success. I think a truly healthy ecosystem is one where a larger number of artists can move more efficiently because the system around them is functioning better. So not looking at the outliers, looking at the overall picture of what's happening for everyone on the ground. So mobility is not just about crossing borders. It's about building systems where artists can move, connect, return, and sustain. And I think that's a more ambitious and a more useful goal than just asking whether an artist can get into a country. Because what we should care about as an industry, as artists, as the folks supporting them, is whether those artists can build durable, meaningful, and repeatable international lives for their work. That's the challenge. And if we want more cultural exchange, we need to build better pathways, not just easier entry points. And I think that means designing for continuity, for coordination, repeatability, and for lower friction. So not just movement, not just activity, but real mobility into new markets. Yes?
Can you even specify that even more? Well, what does it take from the artist and what does it take from you, and what kind of levels are you working at?
Yeah, so I mean, these are kind of my points around what I think it takes from the industry and the artist side.
Yeah.
And you're asking what kind of artists do I work with that are doing this?
No, it's more like the different layers of the cake, I guess. It's the how do you get the frosting on top, which is it's just a bankable thing, and then sustain healthy relationships and reconnect in a feasible way.
Yeah, I mean, so for me, maintaining healthy relationships is a dynamic thing with a lot of different aspects. So, I'm here on a reconnaissance mission myself. We don't have anyone that's touring in the Nordic countries right now. So I'm here to meet folks for the first time and to build relationships on behalf of my roster. The next step for us, if this is successful and it feels like these are potentially viable markets for the acts that I work with, would be to try and find a showcase opportunity for them in one of these countries, probably next year or the year after. We usually use those showcase opportunities as a first sort of entry point or introduction into the market. Before the showcases, we're having lots of conversations with potential booking agents, promoters, publicists, radio trackers, folks who might become part of the team in the market, and are hopefully arranging for them to be at that showcase event. We go home, follow up again after the conference, start building the team and start building the plan for the next 12 to 48 months to re-enter that market following that sort of 2-year period of reconnaissance, showcasing, team building, and planning. And then once we've hit a market for the first time on a touring level, as I think I said before, we're trying to come back at, ideally 6 months later after a first tour to follow up quickly. And then every year after that. And we try and mix between markets for summer festivals in particular too, so that we can use those big summer festival exposure moments to build new audience in markets that are still developing, and then follow up with our hard ticket shows to actually cash in on the value we've created through the audience that we've built in those markets. Does that kind of answer?
Yeah, it answered because it was, for me, it was a bit confused between exporting.
Yep.
What it really matters, or what it means, and also how you interact in the manager, booking agent, label area.
Yeah, and I'm in an interesting position too, where our company acts as a hybrid sort of management agent representative for certain of our artists, and especially in new international markets. Usually, we are the booking agent going into a new market until we've got a third-party booking agent confirmed. So, I've brought up Rum Ragged a couple of times. Their first 2 tours in the UK, I booked, and then after we had booked those, and we had shown that we were serious and we were able to actually coordinate and handle those sorts of things on our own, that's when we were able to attract a third-party booking agent, and now the band works with Craig Corse out of Scotland at CCM Live. So usually it's us as a management team leading the way, wearing all hats, supporting on all fronts in new markets until we're actually able to piece together the teams that we need around the artists that we're working with in that new market. Thank you. So this is my my big pie in the sky idea that I wanted to propose briefly today for your consideration. So I love bringing artists over to Europe, dropping them into the Schengen countries. It's like an absolute dream compared to trying to get into, say, the United States, which is one of the most challenging markets in the world administratively and financially to enter into. And it's even easier than the UK or Australia. And I love this, 90 days in any 180-day touring period. And I think there's potential for there to be a program or a system that operates a little more globally, that clarifies things for cultural workers who are engaging in paid activity on a short-term basis. And so I've come up with this policy that I'm proposing, and I'm currently talking to a couple of different levels of the Canadian government about, and that I'd love to talk to more export offices internationally about, because while this is not in keeping with the current wave of additional restrictions to immigration and entering new countries that is happening, I think it's something that long-term could really be of benefit to artists. So the core idea here is to treat cultural touring as a recognized, time-limited activity and not as some gray area between visitor and worker, which is how it's often treated these days. So what the International Cultural Mobility Waiver would actually do is, instead of having different rules in every country, unclear exemptions, border interpretation risk, as Danielle kind of alluded to with the carnet, sometimes if you don't say things, you won't get in trouble. Sometimes if you say the wrong thing, you're going to have a long day. What I'm proposing here through this new policy would be a standard pre-travel authorization recognized across participating countries, and that is specifically for short-term paid cultural work. And so artists would travel with proof of authorization, a standard engagement certificate, and a clear scope of activity. How it would work, and again, this is all theoretical at this point, but before travel, an artist would apply for a cultural mobility authorization. They would have a presenter certificate of engagement, and at the border, that authorization would be recognized as permitting short-term paid cultural activity by any participating countries. During the tour, the activity would be time limited and clearly defined, and then behind the scenes, tax and labor rules remain in place and compliance is explicit. So, who would administer this? It would be implemented by participating countries and recognized through bilateral or regional agreements. I think the leaders of this sort of a thing would be one or all of ministries of culture, cultural export offices, and coordination would happen with immigration authorities. And ideally, it would be supported by a shared framework of standard documentation, guidance, policy manuals, that sort of thing. And how I think this becomes real is by starting with a pilot. That would be funded by cultural ministries, arts councils, export agencies, tested through specific touring routes. So say Nordic countries, UK, Canada, just as an example there, in partnership with festival and presenter networks. And what we would aim to be getting funded is to pilot the design, to create the documentation standards, and then to evaluate and report the success of the pilot. And for folks who are interested, that's a QR code that goes to the website where there's way more information than I've just shared. I would invite you to please check this out. If this sort of a concept interests you at all, there is a Google form on the website where you can provide feedback. I would love feedback if you work for an export office and you might be able to support this in some way. Please reach out. I am very accessible. My personal cell phone number is everywhere on the internet, unfortunately. I would love to talk to more folks about this because these 4 slides are really just a quick taste of what's being worked on. So I did have a bunch of questions prepared for the room, but we've really only got 10 minutes. So maybe we can just look at this one. If folks have any thoughts they'd like to share. Where does mobility actually break down in your context, whether you're an artist or a funder or somebody supporting artists, and some possible suggested lenses there. So can be as broad as possible. Would anyone like to share sort of issues or struggles they've had with international touring? That's okay. We've got 10 minutes. Yeah.
I was wondering whether it was difficult for artists from the West
Yep.
compared to artists from developing countries.
Okay. So I don't have any experience myself working with artists from developing countries. Most of my acts are based in Canada, just because that's where I am. But does anyone else in the room?
Is it difficult?
I would imagine, yeah.
Then it's more difficult for artists from developing countries.
I would imagine, yeah.
Africa,
Yep.
Yes.
they get rejected all the time.
Well, and I would imagine different passports are recognized in different ways too. I know we have the privilege of, like, my Canadian passport gets me into most places. I know that's not true for every passport either.
I know of experiences from some artists
Yeah.
connected with.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's also part of what I wanted to talk about, because currently in Tempe, Roots Music Denmark, we're working with exchange projects with Mali, Kenya,
Very
and
cool.
Tanzania at this point, and what we've seen is that it's the groups that we're bringing to play in Denmark at this point, those are created around the people that have already gotten a visa. So maybe they will bring, a group will consist of 4, and 3 of them would have gotten the visa beforehand. Then they can bring one more. Then there will be one more that can actually establish that link in between a developing country and to Europe. And as well as we being part of the European Union, we have different rules. So in Denmark, we have some of the harshest immigration laws. At this point, it's UK is actually is looking at the Danish model to actually improve theirs.
Right.
I don't know what that's saying about Denmark at this point. But what people then do is that they apply for a working cultural visa in Spain, for example, because they have a 3-year period, and they are part of the Schengen agreement. So people can travel. If they don't get stopped by some grumpy border crossing. Thankfully that's not happening as often. But what we are trying to push from our side in working with the cultural sector is that we kind of maybe we will take the Spanish model and then just put that everywhere in Europe, so we at least have the same migration laws, or the same visa laws in Europe, since we have this this thankfully weak way of handling our border crossing.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was a bit of that was an answer kind of, but it's a very it's a field where it's just super hard to actually push something like European legislation.
I also think your initiative is super.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
But there is a need to have a coalition.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yep.
coalition of agents, workers, to actually put pressure. And I also know that there's a charter in UNESCO, a UNESCO charter.
Yep.
Artist mobility.
Yep.
Which can also
Make a note of that.
be mentioned.
Thank you. Danielle, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, just a couple of things sort of related to what this gentleman was saying. I had a Georgian band of 6 people. Their first foray into the United States to tour. 2 of the performers illegally stayed, endangering the renewal of the visas for visas for travel and as well as for the petition for the work permit. We did overcome that with some legal help, but that was an issue. And then another thing I just kind of wanted to share is I know a lot of performing artists, for the first time coming into the U.S., they may try to escape what legally they need to do and perform. And so, first of all, you run the risk of being banned for 10 years or forever.
Yep.
I know Canadians who are
Me
banned.
too. We almost got banned on this tour. I'll tell you about that after.
And also some people like to, there's 2 things. There's one actively going on with NASC, which I will say that they are trying to do this camp in Maine without getting the appropriate visas. And I'm a little upset about that, because that endangers my particular artist who I represent. And then also the idea of performing for free so that you're not actually working, that is actually worse than getting paid and getting caught. So don't try that route, because basically the work permit is in place as a protection of the labor force. It's actually a union protection. That's where it comes from. And so coming to the US to perform under the guise of free labor is actually hurting your case more than actually getting paid, because you're devaluing the work for the artists in the US. So that's sort of the thinking behind that. So I just wanted to share that.
So, quick story. On this tour, we had borrowed this van from a local rock band to drive into the U.S. from Canada. And about 10 minutes from the border, we thought, oh, we should probably look through the van and make sure there's nothing suspicious in here. And what we found was a marijuana cannabis pipe.
Oh, shit.
We found a bag. This is before it was legal in Canada. We found a bag with about 4 grams of weed in it. We found about a half dozen roaches, so smoked marijuana cigarettes, a lighter. There was a lot of drug paraphernalia that had been forgotten in this van. And lo and behold, when we crossed the border, we got pulled into secondary and brought into the building, and they had the dogs sniffing out around our vehicle. And I thought, oh my God, we're done. We're going to be banned for a decade. And they had already identified me as the manager or leader of the group or whatever. So the border guy calls me up from his desk and very dramatically pulls an Altoids mint tin out from behind him and opens it up to reveal a bunch of prescription drugs. And he said, "What is this?" And my first thought was, oh my God, we missed the drug tin. Anyway, I turn back, I look at my band, and thankfully they were valid prescriptions from one of my band members who had his prescription bottles with him. But oh my God, in that moment, I was like, I'm done. My career's over. I'm going to jail.
Yeah.
This is, anyway, so don't bring drugs into countries that don't allow them. Just don't travel with drugs. You can get the drugs when you land. I'm not saying don't do drugs. You can do your drugs. Do them in the comfort of your own. Do them at home. Keep them off planes and away from borders. It's tricky. We've only got.
On the tour,
Oh.
you can always get it locally.
Exactly. Find a local supplier. Local economies. Did you have a question, sir?
Funding American drug jobs.
I think I'm the only one here who represents the government.
Yep.
Yeah. So I've been working for the government, Swedish government, and the government policies for 20 years. These things are tricky. It's not the culture policy that runs foreign sort of trade
Mm-hmm.
rules. I mean, the Nordic countries has always been open for the Americans, or since, or Europe has been open for the Americans since the Second World War. And we have tried to, on the highest level in the Nordic countries, to get the America regime, as they call them nowadays, to have sort of other ways of looking at sort of a two-way street.
Mm-hmm.
But it's hard work.
I can imagine.
Takes time. And when you present this, I was thinking, do you know about the other organizations that are doing this work that you're sort of, do you know about On the Move?
Well, no, not all of them internationally, I'm sure. I know some of them.
On the Move?
Yes. Yep.
Because we are now a Swedish representative for On the Move, because I think the only way to actually do some sustainable work
Yep.
in working long term to change this is to work in a network,
Mm-hmm.
so that different countries get to work on the issues from different kind of perspectives.
Yeah.
So even if you're a singular artist, or if you're a manager or a production company, I think supporting those structured work
Mm-hmm.
is really important.
Yeah.
And I think that's, being an old guy, I would say that's the only way forward.
Yeah.
Because you don't know when you start the work how long time it will take.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'd love to talk with you more about On the Move after. And I'd also love to say that you're probably the coolest looking government person I've ever seen in real life.
Welcome to Sweden.
Yeah, jeez. Wish my government representatives were cool. Yep.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the international markets. Is it like to the United States and Europe that you are focused on here?
The goal would be to have as many signatory countries as possible to this kind of a program. But there are countries where I have, more relationships where I think would be easier to start in testing pipelines, but the goal would be for it to be as global as possible.
Because I'm an Inuit from Greenland,
Mm-hmm.
and there are Inuits in Canada, in
There are.
Nunavut and Nunavik, and they have a annual festival called Alienats Arts Festival.
Yep.
And when we are invited there, we have to lie. Oh, we're just here for cultural exchange.
Mm.
Risky.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's risky, and it's very difficult for this festival because it's not like a big money-producing festival.
Yep.
So it is too big for them to apply for visas, and the process is
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
Like when I went to New York,
Mm-hmm.
I had to go to Denmark to have a personal interview at the U.S. Embassy of Copenhagen. So I had to cross the Atlantic twice
Right.
to go there. And when I went
Right.
to Copenhagen, I wasn't sure if I would get the visa.
Yeah.
Thankfully, I got it. But
Yeah.
it's like a big risk.
Oh, it's tough. It's a huge expense too.
Yeah.
Cost of your
So
time.
as an indigenous artist, working around the European and the US, it's also very difficult.
Mm.
So we're like a small segment,
Yep.
and to have access to people like you is also very difficult.
Mm. Well, here I am now.
Yeah.
You're welcome to access me. I might cut it there, folks, and just say thank you because I know we're pushing up on our lunchtime. If you'd like to keep in touch with me, this goes to a link tree. That's me on socials. Thanks so much for your time. Thanks to Nordic Folk Alliance for having me. Appreciate all the questions. Enjoy your lunch.
Thank you.